When your own child looks at you and says you're no longer needed, something inside you breaks. I built that company with my bare hands, the long nights, the endless paperwork, the sacrifices. Back then, my son Ethan was just a teenager watching me struggle at the kitchen table. I used to tell him, one day, this will be yours. And it was. Until the day he decided I didn't belong anymore. It happened on a Tuesday morning, ordinary as any other. I walked into the office, coffee in hand, my usual smile ready. But something felt off. The whispers stopped when I entered. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, face tight with something colder than disappointment. Mom, he said flatly, we've decided it's time for you to step down. The board thinks your ideas are outdated. Outdated. The word hit harder than I expected. After 30 years of building, training, fighting to keep the doors open, I was suddenly too old for the world I created. I didn't argue. I just nodded, collected my things, and walked out with the same quiet dignity I carried the day I founded the company. But Ethan didn't know one thing. The company he thought was his, the one he just kicked me out of, still had my name on the deed. And in 2 days, he was going to find out exactly what that meant. 2 days before that morning, everything still looked perfect from the outside. Ethan was the golden CEO, young and ambitious, running the company everyone believed he built from the ground up. He loved the spotlight, the magazine interviews, the sleek office, the sense of control. I let him have it. After all, that's what mothers do. We stepped back and let our children shine. But behind that polished smile, cracks had begun to form. Ethan had started making decisions that didn't make sense, risky partnerships, unnecessary layoffs, and a growing distance between us. When I questioned him, he'd sigh and say, Mom, this isn't the 90s anymore. We have to modernize. Modernize. Another word for erasing what came before. I didn't push. I'd learned long ago that arguing only made him defensive. Instead, I watched, quietly, carefully, as he surrounded himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear. The board, once loyal to me, now followed his lead. And when I wasn't invited to the latest strategy meetings, I pretended not to notice. The truth was, I had already prepared for them. Years ago, when the company first began to grow, my lawyer advised me to protect my ownership. So I created a trust, one that quietly held the controlling shares. Ethan knew about it once, but time and pride had made him forget. So when he stood there, firing me with all the arrogance of a man who believed he held the power, I didn't stop him. I let him think he'd won, because I knew the storm that was coming. And this time, it wouldn't just test his leadership. It would show him who truly built the empire he was so proud of. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the same one where I used to balance the books in those early years. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence as I looked through old photos. Ethan as a boy helping me stamp envelopes, his little hands covered in ink. He used to say, Mom, one day I'll make you proud. And somewhere along the way, he did. But now, I wasn't sure which hurt more, that he'd forgotten what I built, or that he'd forgotten who taught him how to build it all. The morning after Ethan fired me, I woke up early out of habit. No office to go to, no calls to make, just silence. I brewed my coffee and stared at the company's framed logo hanging above my desk at home. My name was still etched in the original design, though Ethan had once suggested removing it. It looks dated, Mom, he'd said. Maybe he thought success meant rewriting history. By mid-afternoon, I decided to stop feeling sorry for myself and drove downtown. The building that once felt like my second home now looked colder, sharper, Ethan's influence visible even in the minimalist decor. I was about to leave when I spotted Marcy, the receptionist I'd hired a decade ago. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Mrs. Harper, I'm so sorry about what happened, she whispered. It's not fair. Fair. The word almost made me laugh. Business was never fair. That's why I'd built safeguards. Still, I smiled at her, keeping my voice calm. Don't worry, Marcy. Things have a way of balancing out. On the drive home, my phone buzzed, a notification from the corporate bank. A transfer request. Ethan had approved a massive withdrawal from the operating account. My pulse quickened. I called the CFO, an old friend of mine. His voice trembled. He's trying to move funds into a shell account, claiming it's for expansion. But the documentation doesn't add up. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. This wasn't just ego, it was recklessness. Ethan wasn't just erasing me from the company. He was endangering everything we'd built. That night, I pulled out the dusty leather binder labeled Trust Holding. Inside were the documents my lawyer had crafted years ago, the ones that proved the company's true ownership rested with me. Ethan might be CEO, but he wasn't untouchable. I placed the papers neatly on the table and took a slow breath. My son thought he'd fired me. What he didn't know was that, in the eyes of the law, he'd just fired his boss. Over the next few days, I watched from the sidelines as Ethan's ambition began to unravel. He called emergency meetings, announced new strategic directions, and sent out memos that sounded more like power plays than business updates. I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is louder than any argument. I met with my attorney, Mr. Lawson, a man who'd seen enough family feuds to know when to brace for impact. He looked over the trust documents and gave a low whistle. He really has no idea you're the majority shareholder, does he? None, I said, sipping my tea. And I'd like to keep it that way, for now. Lawson nodded. You could take back full control today. I know, I replied, but I want him to see what happens when pride runs a business instead of purpose. While Ethan played CEO, I quietly began gathering information. Old contacts in finance, suppliers, and even a few board members who still respected the woman who started it all. It didn't take long before the pieces began to fit together. Reckless spending, unpaid vendors, and one very nervous investor threatening to pull out. Ethan wasn't leading a company. He was sinking a ship. At night, I'd sit at my kitchen table, poring over statements, emails, and reports. Every number, every line told a story, one of neglect, arrogance, and desperation. I wanted to be angry, but more than anything, I was heartbroken. I hadn't just built a company, I'd built a legacy for him. And now he was tearing it apart to prove he didn't need me. The real turning point came when I got a call from Marcy again. Mrs. Harper, something's happening, she said quietly. Ethan's been shouting in his office all morning. The investors are demanding answers. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. I drove to the building, walked past the glass doors that no longer bore my name, and stepped into the chaos I once called home. The conference room was filled with tension. Ethan's voice echoed off the walls. We'll recover the losses in the next quarter, he said, his tone defensive. The investors didn't look convinced. One of them, Mr. Chen, turned when he saw me standing at the door. Mrs. Harper, he said, surprised. I didn't realize you were still involved. I smiled gently. Technically, I never left. Ethan's face went pale. Mom, what are you doing here? Just observing, I replied, walking slowly around the table. My fingers brushed over the glossy surface, the same one we'd bought together when we signed our first major. It's funny, I added softly, how quickly things change when people forget where they came from. One of the investors cleared his throat. We were just discussing the missing fund. Perhaps you could clarify. Ethan shot me a look that was half panic, half anger. This isn't your concern anymore. Oh, I think it is, I said, sliding a folder across the table. You see, I've been reviewing the trust documentation. Turns out, this company still legally belongs to me. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's jaw dropped. What are you talking about? I met his eyes. When your father passed, I restructured everything to protect the company from outside takeover. You may have the title of CEO, but ownership never left my name. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. You can't just take it back. I'm not taking anything, I said calmly. I'm saving what's left. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room, once filled with the hum of power, now felt frozen. Ethan looked around, searching for support that wasn't there. The investors avoided his gaze. They'd already made their decision. Effective immediately, Mr. Chen said quietly, we recognize Mrs. Harper as the rightful owner. We'll coordinate a transition. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply gathered my papers, gave my son one last, steady look, and said, next time you decide to fire someone, make sure you know who signs your paycheck. The sound of the door closing behind me was the sweetest silence I'd ever heard. Ethan's world began to collapse the moment I walked out of that conference room. Within hours, the board called for an emergency meeting, this time without him. News of the ownership revelation spread like wildfire. Whispers filled the office halls where my name, once erased, was now spoken again with a mixture of awe and relief. That night, I sat in my study with a cup of chamomile tea, thinking about how power can twist love into pride. I had protected that company like a child, and now I was watching my own child learn the hardest lesson of all. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, disheveled, pale, and broken in a way that words couldn't disguise. He looked nothing like the confident man who had fired me. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside. Of course. He sat across from me at the same table where I used to teach him how to balance a checkbook when he was 10. For a long moment, he couldn't even meet my eyes. Then he finally said, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own." I nodded slowly. "Independence isn't wrong, Ethan. But pride without respect? That's a dangerous mix." His voice cracked. "I ruined everything. The investors, they are gone. The accounts are frozen. And the employees, they are scared. I don't even know where to start." I looked at him, my heart heavy but calm. "You start by admitting your mistake. And by understanding that leadership isn't about control, it's about care." Tears welled in his eyes. "I don't deserve another chance." "No," I said softly, "but sometimes the people who don't deserve a second chance need it the most." He broke down then, shoulders shaking, tears falling freely. And for the first time in months, I saw my son, not the CEO. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I didn't want to humiliate you," I said. "I wanted you to see the truth. You're strong, Ethan. You always have been. But you forgot that strength comes from humility." He nodded, whispering, "I understand now." In that moment, something shifted, not just between us, but within him. He wasn't the arrogant businessman anymore. He was my boy again, humbled by the weight of consequence but ready to learn. Over the next few weeks, we worked together to rebuild. The same people who once whispered now offered cautious support. The company, though bruised, began to find its footing again under a new balance, one built on respect and teamwork. And when the papers were finalized, I handed Ethan a document. "This is the new structure," I told him. "Equal ownership, equal say. But remember, family comes first, business second." He smiled through his tears, nodding. "I won't forget, Mom." As I watched him sign, a quiet peace settled in my heart. Sometimes love means stepping back. Other times, it means stepping in, not to control, but to remind. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a woman who'd been fired. I felt like a mother who'd finally been heard. Weeks turned into months, and the company began to heal, just as we did. The tension that once filled every boardroom and family dinner was slowly replaced by something lighter. Ethan started listening more, asking for advice instead of giving orders. The employees noticed, and trust began to rebuild one small gesture at a time. One afternoon, I found him in my old office, the same one he had taken over so confidently before. This time, he wasn't behind the desk barking orders. He was sitting quietly, reviewing reports, his posture thoughtful, almost humble. He looked up and smiled softly. "I never realized how much you carried, Mom. I thought you were just in my way. But now I see, you were the foundation." I smiled, resting my hand on the doorframe. "You just needed time to understand what it takes to build something that lasts." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm grateful you didn't give up on me." "Giving up was never an option," I said gently. "That's not what mothers do." Outside, the company's new sign gleamed in the sunlight. It wasn't just his name anymore, it was ours. The logo had been redesigned to reflect partnership, not each. It was a quiet but powerful symbol of everything we'd rebuilt together. In the evenings, we started having dinner together. Sometimes we talked about business, but mostly we talked about life, about his childhood, his late father, the lessons we both learned the hard way. There was still guilt in Ethan's eyes sometimes, but I never let it linger too long. "You've already made it right," I would tell him. We both grew from it. He'd smile, sometimes with tears. "You're still teaching me, aren't you?" "Always," I'd reply with a wink. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life never is. But it was honest, earned, and peaceful. I had gone from being dismissed to being respected, not because I fought louder, but because I stood quietly in truth. Ethan learned that leadership isn't power, it's purpose. And I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that restore us. And sometimes being fired isn't the end. It's the moment you remember who you really are. A year later, I stood at the company's annual gala, watching Ethan deliver a heartfelt speech. He thanked the team for their resilience, the investors for their trust, and finally, he looked toward me, his voice trembling slightly. "And to my mother," he said, pausing as the room fell silent, "you didn't just build this company, you built me." I forgot that somewhere along the way, but you never stopped believing I could find my way back. The audience applauded, but I just smiled, feeling a calm pride settle in my chest. I didn't need the credit. I had already received my reward. See my son grow into the man I always knew he could be. After the event, he walked over and wrapped his arms around me. I'm proud to be your son, he whispered. For a long time, I had believed my silence was weakness, but now I understood it was strength in disguise. Strength to wait, to forgive, and to trust that love could heal even the deepest crack. Life had come full circle. The company thrived, our bond restored, and peace found its way back into our home. As we stood together under the lights that night, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes you lose everything to remember what truly mattered. And sometimes being fired is the best thing that ever happened because it sets you free to be yourself again.